This video will talk about why we use scripts, essentially programs in MATLAB. We'll talk about how you create a basic script using the built-in editor or pretty much any text editor, how you get MATLAB to execute the script once you've written it, some problems and features of script variables, and then finally name conflicts that can come up when you write these scripts that can sometimes make things a bit difficult to debug if you're surprised by things. If you can fit everything you want to do on a single line in MATLAB, there's really no reason to use a script that I can think of, other than maybe to save what you did. But most of the time we can't fit everything we want to do on a single line. We'll have a number of lines of code that we want to enter into MATLAB, and we often want to go back and change some of these, so we'd like to have a program, or what MATLAB calls a script, to save all the things that we've done. In this version of MATLAB, about the easiest way to make a script is to bring up the new script command. This will open an editor, the built-in MATLAB editor for creating scripts, and as you might guess, this is going to make it about the easiest to create one. So let's create one of these scripts by just putting in a couple common commands that we would do in MATLAB, but I'm going to suppress the output so we won't see the calculations until I calculate z. Once you've written a script like this, you need to save it somewhere. So let's go up here to save, and let's save this as, we'll call it in the C drive in a temporary directory. We'll store it as myscript.m. I already have something there, but I'm going to save it on top of that. So these are sometimes called .m files, or just MATLAB scripts. Now to execute these commands, you have a couple choices. One way you can execute them is to type the name, in this case my script without the .m extension, down here in the command window. That gives me an error function, undefined function or variable. That's because, and it asks me if it suggests another name that it knows something about that I don't really want. The problem here was that when you try to execute a script, MATLAB needs to know what directory to go look for that script in, because this is a file that's stored out on your hard disk. If you do a pwd, that tells you where MATLAB is currently looking for scripts, and that's not the directory that I stored it in. I stored it in the temporary directory up here. So to allow MATLAB to easily find that, I could type in the whole path name, but I'm going to change to that directory. Now if I do pwd, it shows me I'm in that directory, and when I type in my script, it now finds it and executes it, and it showed me the final result, the value of z, when I got all done. There's nothing wrong with executing it that way, although that's not the way I'll typically do it. What I'll typically do is just come up here and hit the F5 key. That will execute the script also, you notice down here. If I'm in the wrong directory, let's go up a directory. So now my script will not execute down here because I'm in the wrong directory. When I hit the F5 key up here, it's going to put up this box telling me that I can change to that folder, which I usually want to do, and then it'll execute it. Next time you hit F5, it's already in the right directory, so it will execute it. Now if you're concerned that you don't want it changing directories, don't use the F5 key, but usually that's not a problem for the work I do, so that's how you'll see me execute most of these scripts, is with an F5 key. Looking back at the list here, what I promised you, I realize I skipped over something here, the using any text editor to create an M file. So let's go back and take a look at that. So if I go out to the operating system and open that directory, I can see a file there. This is a normal ASCII or text file that I can edit with any of the common text editors. Let's just use the built-in one for Windows. and bring it over here. So there we go. That's the same thing I typed in the MATLAB script. I can edit it here if I want. Store it. And MATLAB won't hold that against me at all. In fact, its editor watched and realized that I added that line to it. I can still hit F5, and now it gives me a different answer because I had modified the script. Problems or features, depending on how you think of it, of script variables. The commands you see in the script here will be executed in exactly the same way as if I had typed them in the command window. So for example, after I get done with this script, if I want to see the value of x, even though that wasn't displayed when I ran the script, I just have to enter the name x, hit carriage return, and it shows me that value. Now that's handy, so it makes it easier to debug the script. But like anything that's handy, it can also be a problem. In my script here, I may have used the variable I for something. When I run the script, nothing about I shows up here. In fact, it wasn't even important in the script. But then later, if I do a calculation, like if I think I is going to be the square root of -1 its default value, normally if you square that, you should get -1, and instead I get 81 because I had defined it in the script, and that can cause problems. Now this cuts both ways. Suppose in my script I wanted to set z equal to the square root of -1, and the way I choose to do that is by saying it's going to be I squared. And let's come down here and clear I. So I now is square root of -1. When I run this script, everything will work the way I expect it. So hit F5, it says z is -1, just like I think it should be. But if I was to change the value of I before I run the script, then come up here and run it, by bulletproof, I mean I want the calculations in the script here to execute the same way no matter what variables were defined prior to the script being run. So up here, I'm going to start the script by clearing all variables. Now when I run it, I get -1 for z. If I defined I to be something else down here, when I run the script, I still get -1 for z because this command will remove all the previous definitions, including the definition for I. Now this can be dangerous if I had some variable that was important to me down here. Then when I run my script, my important variable is gone. All I get is x, y, and z. The way I usually use MATLAB, I typically have one script I'm running at any given time, and so I put a clear at the beginning, and then I do all my calculations in here, so this doesn't turn out to be a problem. But if you are planning to run multiple scripts and you don't want your script goofing up the variables that might be important outside of that script, you could here just clear out the variables you plan to use, and that way you could be assured that they aren't going to start with something that will goof up your calculations. And they also will leave other important variables defined. Again, not the way I usually do it. I usually do it that way. But if you want to be a little nicer to people that are using your script, it would be good not to clear out all their variables. The final thing to discuss here are name conflicts. MATLAB puts very few restrictions on variable names and script names. This is nice in that it makes it easy to write things, but it also can lead to problems. So right now, if I say my script, it executes the script the way I think it should. But if I was to define a variable, now when I say my script, it does not run the script. It gives me the name of it gives me the value of the variable I just defined. So it's good to try to make sure that variable names and script names don't end up being the same. But as you get more scripts and more variables, it's almost inevitable that sooner or later you'll end up with two having the same name. If you're not sure which MATLAB is going to use when you type in a particular name like that, you can use which, and it tells me in this case that it's a variable. If I use myscript-all, or which myscript-all, then it shows me that it is a variable and it also is a file or a script that it can find. Another thing you can do that runs you into trouble is to save this as the name of a function, like the square root operator. Now in this version of MATLAB, it's nice because it's warning me that there is a built-in function with that same name, so we have a name conflict, but it did let me store it as that name. So now we have the problem that if we say square root of some number, so now we have a very confusing situation. We have the locally defined sqrt.m, and then we have, it turns out, multiple commands in MATLAB that also take sqrt. So if I ask it the square root of 4, it correctly tells me that's 2, and it does not execute the sqrt script. But if I say sqrt, now it runs the script instead of looking up the square root of 4. And if I say sqrt 2 comma 1, it says I don't know what you're talking about because I have too many input arguments for the sqrt function. So this is a mess. I generally suggest excuse me, you avoid doing this by just simply not giving it names of built-in functions up here. But if you're ever not sure, the which command will tell you where you stand at some particular time. If you really want to make your life unpleasant, define a variable called sqrt. So now we have a variable called sqrt, we have a script called sqrt, and we have built-in MATLAB functions called sqrt. So if I just say what's sqrt, it's the value of the variable I defined. If I say find the square root of 9, it can't do it because it found the variable and it thinks it's a matrix and it's giving you an error because of it being a matrix. So I made a mess here with all this sqrt stuff. To bail myself out of this mess, I want to do a clear star. That'll get rid of the variables I defined by this. I want to go back up here, and in the editor, I want to save this as a name that is better for scripts, like my script. And then the last thing I'm going to need to do is to come over here to my temporary directory and delete the sqrt function. So now I think I have fixed things to the point that, let's see, if I say square root, it gives me an error because there is no variable called sqrt and there is no script called sqrt. And if I say square root of a number, it executes the function as I expect. So I've talked about why we use scripts, how you make them, how you execute them, and then a few problems you get into the way you use variables and scripts, and problems you can get into if you mix up variable names, script names, and built-in function names in MATLAB.